Good evening, everyone, and thank you for coming. I wanted to start out this evening by just talking a little bit about the Gay and Lesbian Archive of Mid-America. It was founded in 2009 as an effort to collect, preserve, and make accessible the documents and artifacts that reflect the histories of the LGBTQ communities in the Kansas City region. And we have been blessed with a very enthusiastic response from members of the community, as well as users of the materials that those members of the community have given us. And we have experienced a wide range of projects that have emerged from the archive, including quite a bit, surprisingly, quite a bit of artwork. Uh, uh, Work like Ruben's and some other artists. And it is our honor to make these materials available and to preserve them. And we are absolutely thrilled to be able to participate in this conversation with one of our most intriguing users, Mr. Castillo.
Thanks, Stuart. Yeah, it's been really great. We started collaborating, gosh, like back in like 2019. I originally began this collaboration. I had been teaching at the Kansas City Art Institute, and I'd been granted the opportunity to come up with my own class. And a lot of my graduate research was centered on queer identity, but I had kind of veered into this like realm of thinking about queer history a little bit and the way like history was sort of playing in like my own work and my own like thinking about my own background and the way that was influencing what I was making at the time. And I started diving into this kind of whole theoretical world of queer archives, and just thinking broadly about, the like quote unquote archive, like the great big archive of the world. And it was a really like conceptually rich field for me to be thinking about and to be working within, but I had never really taught anything around it, and my own work was kind of thinking about my own kind of personal archive. And so for me, this opportunity to come up with a class was like, well, I think I just have to do like a queer archive class. And I just was like, let's throw like everything into it. I knew about Glamma from a previous exhibition that had been curated by, at the time, Charlotte Street Foundations, uh, which is, for anyone who may not be from the area, Charlotte Street Foundation is a local nonprofit arts organization in Kansas City, Missouri. And they had a curator in residence program, and one of their curators was Danny Orendorff. And he had organized this really incredible exhibition thinking about queer history. And he had included objects from Glamma. This was like about in 2013. And I remember seeing all these objects. And in particular, I remember seeing Phyllis Schaefer's book. It was on view. And it was really incredible to see all of this history. And it was one of the first, I think it was one of the first like art exhibitions that I saw that really incorporated a lot of that history very intentionally next to the artwork. So it had a really, really big impact on me. Um, so I remembered that, and I was like, I sent you an email, and I was like, I'm thinking about teaching this class. I have no idea what I want to do, but let's figure it out. And we started talking, and we started organizing field trips, readings, discussions. And pretty soon this turned into a course that was wildly successful in the spring of 2020 and continued to be taught there for 4 years while I was still in Kansas City. I'm zooming to you all now from Troy, New York, where I've moved on to take on an assistant professor position at Skidmore College. But I still have so much fondness for Kansas City, and all of the ways that it sort of has like richly influenced my career and my life. And so, yeah, all these years we continued to the class continued to visit Glamma, and every year it's wild to see the way that the collection has grown, and to continue to see the community engage with it in really fun and unique ways. So I'm really excited to be talking with you about it. It's like a little like it feels like a little homecoming a little bit, you know.
Indeed.
So I just wish I could be there in person.
So, so your exposure to the archive then results in this class. Then how what is it about the materials that draws you to sort of engage with them through your own work as an artist?
Yeah, yeah. I think for that, it might make most sense to share some images. So let me pull some of this up. I always like to start my talks, like any sort of artist talk I give, with these objects. When I was a kid, I was like really, really, really influenced, or like interested in these like photo albums. I was just like a really curious kid, and I wanted to like know about everything and everyone that was around me. Um, I also was like, I was like the only like mixed race biracial person in my family. My other two siblings were fully white. They were from they're like my half siblings, and so I automatically kind of felt a little like weird about like who I was like something's not like adding up, you know. So I got really curious, and I was looking at like these photo albums that my mom had made. I was like a really nosy child, and I'd like dig through people's stuff. Um, and I found these photo albums. There were three of them. There was one for my brother, one for my sister when they were born. They're like little baby books, and sort of like their progression as they got older. So I was learning a lot about my siblings and about my parents, and like associated family beyond that. And then typically there would be a third one that would be me. But I never had one. My mom, like, I don't know, she got like tired by the time like the third kid came around and was like, I don't know, I'm not going to do one. Or she just never got around to it. But the third one was this like photo archive of photos from like her and my dad's honeymoon. So I really got to learn a lot about both of them. And I was so transfixed by these objects. Like they told me so many fascinating stories. There were like little notes on the margins of them. And so I was just like, I was so curious about them, and I would dig through them over and over and over again. Um, and when I got to graduate school and I was making a lot of work, I was really um, interested in cataloging and understanding my own life and my own like queer identity, my own relationships. I was like this quote by Jose Esteban Munoz, who wrote this incredible book called Cruising Utopia. He's writing about these ideas of like the ways that we look back at the past, so like imagine the future. And he writes that this really great quote, which I'll read here. It says, "Queerness is rarely complemented by evidence, or at least by traditional understandings of the term. The key to queering evidence, and by that I mean the ways in which we prove queerness and read queerness, is by suturing it to the concept of ephemera. So we can think of ephemera as trace, the remains, and the things that are left in the hanging in the air like a rumor." I just love the poetics of that quote. I think it's like a really, really beautiful phrase. And it really matched up with what I'd been doing at the time from 2013 to even sometimes a little bit today, where I was documenting mine and my partner's bed. So I was kind of like actively building my own archive in a way. But I didn't really know that that's what I was doing. I made a bunch of artwork about this. So like thinking about this personal history of mine and creating like new unique works on paper. And so, you know, as I kind of continued after graduate school and started making this class and really more intentionally engaging with archives, both like pedagogically as an educator, but also like as an artist too, I would be taking these students to Glamma, and I would be seeing these materials just like they were. And we were all sort of transfixed together. So in a similar way that I was thinking about like my own archive, I was thinking too about like these materials as well and what can they reveal, not just about, these people who are recorded in these pages, but also what do they sort of reveal about myself? What do they reveal about the viewers? What do they reveal about the world? So for anyone who hasn't been to the exhibition at the Nerman Museum, these are installation views of my current work. All of this is really kind of pulling from my archival research. And so for me, like that archival research, it tells me a lot about history and it tells me a lot about different communities in the past. It tells me about different pains that have occurred in the past. And I feel like the more aware we become of this like history, the more we ultimately learn how to think about our moment in the present. Um, and ultimately, that's sort of what Munoz was talking about. We have to look at the past in order to understand the future. So this installation it's not the first time I've utilized Glamma materials, but it's utilized in a way that was really, really intentional. Um, it was about talking about Kansas City specifically. There are reproductions of a magazine article um, that were kind of saved as like archival material in this specific collection. But also, to go even further, I was looking at a really specific collection by uh, a woman, Phyllis Schaefer, who is the mother of gay rights activist Drew Schaefer, uh, who was one of like Kansas City's like most prominent early gay rights activists, who was really involved in the larger national movement too. And so as I kept like thinking about this material, I was like, it really told me a lot about them, and also like their sort of resilience, and how they kind of continued to go through. So um, I might stop there because that was kind of a long-winded answer to your question, but um, yeah, it's
So,
yeah.
um, can you describe any other sort of meaningful engagements or impactful encounters you've had with archival resources?
Yeah, yeah. Let me, yeah, there's a few things too to kind of like keep sharing a little bit more. Like I said, like my own personal archive was really important for me, but when I was in school, they didn't really teach a lot about queer artists and queer history. There wasn't quite as many of them. There wasn't this sort of push for like, let's get all these diverse artists, more diverse like artists in our classrooms. It's quite recent that this we have been seeing this push happen. And I remember seeing this piece by Felix Gonzalez Torres and sort of like burned into my memory of like Two Pillows. And so, I mean, like this became like kind of a foundational piece for me, I feel like it was pretty evident from like my earlier work. It's what we're kind of looking at as a billboard that Torres printed of two pillows with two kind of sunken in impressions. And so we're thinking about like ghosts of people who have been here in the past. And all of his work throughout his career was highly political, um, really influenced particularly by the failings of the US government in regards to the HIV/AIDS pandemic. It still tells a lot about the crisis that we're in still to this day. Um, and this was this kind of way of like building for him. I felt like he was really also thinking about objects in history, and really putting them out there in the public. And so for me, it was like really meaningful to see that. Um, but also, I mean, like some of the most meaningful engagements are when like people write in the margins. Um, one of this like most incredible collection pieces that Glamma has is this scrapbook by Phyllis Schaefer, which has all these really incredible and important headlines that really track some violent history, like kind of the violent histories of gay people and LGBT and larger queer communities too. Um, but also kind of reveal a little bit about her as well. And while I loved like the learning about the history and kind of seeing that and having that kind of out there, I was also really deeply curious about who she was too, because my interest is always really in the people who do this work and the people who are, who are not present. And so I loved these like little notes. They were super important, and I actually reproduced many of them in the works in the show. Um, so I love this, like, she had these like little notes. And I love this one in particular because it's like the object is gone. So it's like she's saying, "Isn't this fabulous? Now we're beginning to get somewhere." And I'm like, what, like where, like what happened? What made her write that? And I love this idea that she's like sparking all this curiosity. I also love the way that it like kind of showed her sass a bit too. Like this little section right here is all this like headline articles about Anita Bryant, who, if you don't know your queer history, she was this like kind of nasty person that I think a lot of the people like libs of TikTok are kind of modeling themselves after with anti-trans rhetoric. She's kind of spearheaded that originally in the 70s, by being a huge homophobic bigot, and her star immediately started to fall. And I just love that she was like, "This is what we've been hoping for." Like this headline about, she's falling. I was like, she's a little petty here. Um, so it was like it was really fascinating to me and really interesting. So those are some like really important ones. Um, and again, like another kind of quote that I really loved. This one here from Heather Love, which is from a book called Feeling Backward. I love this quote: "Like many demanding lovers, queer critics promise to rescue the past when they, in fact, dream of being rescued themselves." And so I just kind of love this like idea where it's like, yeah, we are looking at this history and these stories about other people, but we're really just trying to learn more about ourselves, right? We're learning about how do we survive. And I feel like she makes that really evident there. Um, so yeah, I mean those like moments, like these floral patterns, which were from that collection, because she was archiving this stuff in like wallpaper sample books. All of that was so influential to me. And it allowed me to like really create some new work, but also like in the ways that I was thinking about my community too. Um, in 2020, I'd organized this really cool presentation with a Philadelphia artist, Amy Cousins, and we brought together a couple variety of different artists to talk about the ways that queer archives are featured into their work. So we got like artist Bryce Peterson from Philadelphia, Veronica Chechi, who's in Austin, Texas, Mary Tremonti and V. Adams, who are both in Pittsburgh, and they run this really cool project called the Queer Ecology Hanky Project, where they reimagine the gay hanky code, but in a new sense, where they're imagining it from an ecological standpoint. And then of the other artists was Corinne Teed, who at the time was in Minneapolis. They're now in Philadelphia as well. And Amy and I continued to curate, and I love your question here because you talked about like impactful encounters. Uh, and so this was a project that we put together called Encounters in the Archive. And in it, like we invited a bunch of queer printmakers to submit their own archival materials. And then we've kind of played like matchmaker, with the materials, and we like anonymously assigned people different objects from like queer history, whether it was like actual like, from their own personal history, or something that they just were like, yeah, this may not be queer to anybody else, but it is to me. Um, like we've got like pages from Phyllis Schaefer's like book here, which this was my object that I contributed. And then everyone had like this call and response. So they like made work about that. And so it's not necessarily like my like meaningful impact entirely, but it was really exciting to see everyone else's meaningful impact, which I guess is like that's pretty meaningful to me. Um, This one right here is really cool. This map, because it's actually a hand-drawn map that this artist had actually made for uh, one of the Women Fests, which was this like radical lesbian music festival. She was actually volunteering there, and she made this like hand-drawn map, and she like submitted that, which is really, really incredible. So tons of like different materials, different interpretations of the theme, and then really like incredible works that were made in response to it. This is like one of those projects I just feel like I'm never going to forget. And so this is actually a traveling portfolio of prints that I have, and we pull it out. There's a really cool photo from the Jewel Box review right in there, which is really great. So yeah, those are like a couple. Those are a couple for me.
So you've sort of touched on the importance of queer archives to your work now.
Mhm.
Uh, how do you see that relationship evolving in the days to come, in the future?
Yeah, for me, I really see it evolving in the sense of now I'm beginning to think more about like personal connections, right? And I'm thinking about objects as triggers, which is really influenced by like this really wonderful writing on HIV/AIDS cultural production. It's called We're Having This Conversation Now. It's a co-authored book by Theodore Ted Kerr and Alexandra Juhas. And in it, they talk about these historical objects from HIV/AIDS history, and as ways to kind of like trigger conversations, because they found that when they were having these conversations that they would often get triggered. They come from like two different generational backgrounds, and they were engaged both in HIV/AIDS work, but in different kind of ways. And so they found that they would sometimes like their approaches would trigger one another and bring up a lot of feelings. And of course, like, when you're talking about mass death from that, you're bound to kind of cause those feelings to kind of emerge, right? But how do we sort of let them bubble up to the surface in a way that feels sort of safe? And also, like, how do we make space for all of that? Um, so reading that was really important for me um, to think about this idea that like objects can like trigger different memories, trigger different feelings. And as I continue to kind of move away from making work that's super autobiographical, I'm really thinking more now about like what types of community feelings are there, and what are different ways that these archival materials can show us like how to keep fighting. Because I mean, the fights are still happening to this day. I mean, there's still um, so many things that are happening in the world that, libs of TikTok I already brought up, but also like so much anti-trans legislation. Um, and also like even what's going on kind of like on a global level with, everything happening in Gaza right now, and a lot of the war that's happening there, and the mass death that's happening at a different level, right? I mean, we're even seeing ACT UP New York has like adapted the silence equals death logo um, to kind of reflect a pro-Palestinian kind of mindset, right? Like it's become this like transformation that people are adapting in real time, and people are looking at queer history because this was a really marginalized group that like fought back and organized in many different ways. Um, so it's just one history. It's only one group. There's so many other different marginalized communities, right? So I love the way that archives really preserve that history, because I just think like so much of right now is filled with, and I see it in my students all the time, nihilism and like a lack of hope. And you can feel really alone, you can feel really alienated. So when I see like these archival materials, I feel some bit of hope. And it's like, oh, you know what? I'm not alone. Like there is somebody else has fought this fight before. Um, so I don't know. That to me was really important And I hope to keep making work that addresses that in a way that highlights that and makes maybe the world a little less lonely, a little more hopeful. That's what I am hoping to do. So that's some of the directions that I'm wanting to kind of like move in.
What what kinds of challenges, or have you experienced any challenges working in archives, whether that's logistical, conceptual, whatever kind of challenges that might have presented themselves?
Gosh, I mean, the dead ends sometimes. You could come in with like I could have this really specific thing that I'm looking for, and I'll like never find it, you know. And then all of a sudden, and I could go through like, for example, Phyllis Schaefer's volumes. I was going through them over and over and over, did a digitized version of them over and over again. And each time I felt like I would find something new and something different. And um, so sometimes like if I would come into the archive looking for something really, really, really specific, I may not necessarily find that. Um, and I think it's that kind of slow, intentional way of like looking for things and finding them. Thankfully, I mean, I think like, you know, you were there to kind of help me find a couple different objects or like lead me into like the right direction. But I think sometimes like the big challenge is like the lack of like immediacy and like knowing what to find. Also a big challenge too is you know, the what actually is there, and wanting to find something that maybe like speaks to a broader different range of communities, right? Um, just to like kind of, I mean, just to even sort of mildly put it like with Glamma, it's like there's like a lack of people of color, right? A lack of like the black black community in Kansas City and that collection. That can always be a challenge, not just for me, but even for students. I mean, you and I have had plenty of conversations about this, um, about talking about those kind of like pain points in the collection, and like desires within the community, you know. But that's one of those things too, where it's like, even though that's like a challenge, it for me, what I would always do to support those students in that moment was like, how do you make that then like, how do you make that actually visible, right? It actually like brings up another kind of conversation point for you, to be like, what am I going to do now to kind of make that happen? How does that sort of now instill like a new desire into me? So it's like kind of pivoting from being like a challenge where it like stops you, to kind of like being a little more resilient within the archive and like pressing on. And I mean, we've seen that, we're Kansas City is seeing that right now with the really great work that um, Nasir Montalvo is doing with the Black Queer Archive that they're working on right now, which is that they're actually publishing right now and like really kind of doing all this like really great work with that, right? And that's super important and really impactful. That's a really big impact that's happening. So I think that's an example of a challenge that has really kind of emerged, allowed like a new kind of solution to emerge. So yeah.
Um, you're obviously an experienced archival researcher.
At this point, thanks to you.
What advice do you have for folks who might be interested in following in your footsteps and engaging with these kind of materials?
Make good friends with your local archivist. Truly. I mean, like it's really great to I think what makes my experience with Glamis so rich has actually been the connection that you and I have had. The kind of like calm comfort of like walking into Glama and just like you kind of knowing more about my work. And I could come in having looked through the finding aid, and made some reserve some items to be pulled out, And then you would kind of come in and be like, by the way, I saw what you pulled up. Here's some extra stuff that you might just want to look at, you know? And I think it's just like that building that relationship is like so, so important. And to really kind of expand it even further, right? Those relationships are the most important thing. Community relationships are crucial. They're so, so critical. Um, they are the reason that Nasir was really able, you know, an artist like Nasir was able to create um, the Black Queer Archives for Kansas City as well. Um, right? Like they were able to kind of get out into the community and sort of build those trusts, right? And create that space that, you know, Black queer people in Kansas City felt like they could, you know, kind of do that. And I think that's great. I think that's okay. I think it's okay to not have it all in kind of one place, you know? And but I think no matter what, it's like always building those relationships. I think a lot about what Adrienne Marie Brown talks about. Um, is like you're sort of moving at the speed of trust when she talks about emergent strategy. She's like, move at the speed of trust, um, and build resilience by building relationships. You know, that's how we get through all of this is like by building those relationships and building those kind of connections overall. That's like I think that's the biggest advice. The other thing too, at Skidmore, we had recently Hilton Owls come and speak. This is incredible Black queer um, cultural writer, art critic, just really, really fabulous individual in general. And he had this really lovely um, point in his talk. He, he was talking about uh, he's talking about Agnes Martin, or no, not Agnes Martin. Oh my gosh, why am I blanking on the photographer? He was talking about a photographer and all these like different elements in her work, and sort of made this point of like the biggest bit of advice that he would have for anyone in the world is just to remain porous, to remain open, basically, to let like all the stuff kind of come in and let like new ideas kind of come and emerge, right? Um, this is something I mean I got from research like art history classes, right? But it's like when you're researching and you're writing a paper, you never once want to just start wanting to look for like one specific thing. It's you just sort of open yourself up and let everything sort of come to you. And then from that, like let the let the thing emerge from itself. Don't come in with like a specific hard meaning, you know, with anything in your work. Whether that's creative work or archival research, right? I think that's a really important advice that I have to try to even remember myself. So building relationships, building community, you know, being open to like anything and everything, kind of becoming the focus, and being surprised, of course. Um, and yeah, making friends with your local archivist. Um, and learning to how to use a finding aid. How to use a finding aid is really important. Your archivist can walk you through that. But it's really important and to support them, to like build community support and to speak out about it. Just today, uh, I saw about the William Way Community Center in Philadelphia lost its funding to expand, lost state funding to expand. It was stripped away from them for their political position that they had a political position they had vocalized. Um, and um, speaking out kind of in a pro-Palestinian way. And regardless of your thoughts on the matter, um, it felt, you know, really kind of prescient that they were being kind of punished for having a humanitarian point of view, um, for an oppressed group, for a marginalized group. And it was really kind of painful to see then their queerness sort of weaponized against them Five Libs of TikTok, which is again this horrible TikTok account that is anti-trans, far right, in all of these different ways, making up lies about the community center. And it was really painful to see that kind of support disappear. But what was equally incredible was the way the community kind of showed up for them, is showing up for them right now. Um, so showing up first and supporting your kind of community archives and your community centers, it's wildly important because they're extremely underfunded. If libraries are really underfunded, archives are even more, I feel like archives are even more underfunded. Um, yeah,
Well, and that just circles back to your point about the material that are in these archives and how they serve as models of resistance
Mhm.
and or examples of models of resistance in times that were perhaps even more challenging than the ones we find ourselves in now,
Yeah,
uh, when the oppression was even more stringent and harsh.
yeah,
And uh, that's where, as you said, that's where you take your hope
yeah,
and your realization that this community has been through this before and was able to emerge uh, uh, victorious. As I teach a queer American history class,
yeah,
and one of the sessions that I teach, I call one step forward, two steps back. So it's just a repetitive theme of the history of this community, and that, as you alluded to, is one of the important takeaways from engaging with these kinds of materials.
yeah, yeah, definitely. Definitely. I mean, yeah, I always think a lot about that too. It's like one step forward, two steps back, right? And I think it's really hard generationally because like now we're so used to getting everything like quick, 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 right? And we've lost our like ability to be slow and patient. And I think like I can just see like when one loss happens, like with my students, it's like catastrophic,
Yeah,
absolutely catastrophe. It's like the end of the world. And I'm like, no, 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 no. Like, don't lose hope yet. Like, don't like build resentment or don't like, you know, this or that. Like, don't like, let's not like fall into those traps of like negativity. It's like I really hope that no matter what, we don't lose our ability to kind of like listen to people and to remain porous and open, all of us in all different ways, and not be like kind of stuck in one mode of, being, right? Because like when we get stuck, that's sort of where that oppression begins to kind of win. And um, we stop really, I feel like, functioning as a society. Yeah.
yeah.
I didn't realize I was going to get on a soapbox today. Yikes. Yeah. What are some, like, you've worked with so many great, like, um, artists and art projects over the years. What have been some of the other highlights that you've been, or like some guests that you've kind of brought in that have been really impactful?
Well, we have sort of a rotating, not well, it's not a parade, but it's a regular flow of folks coming um, from across the country. One of my favorites was Annie Sprinkle and her partner, whose name I can't remember
Yes.
right now. I'm terrible with names, but they were here at the behest of the Nerman,
Yeah.
and they came, and I knew of Annie Sprinkle from her days as a performer, as a sex performer.
Hmm.
And so I knew who she was. So I was all aflutter because the celebrity was coming to the archive.
Yeah.
And we had a really, really, really great visit. I learned a lot about their work and um, her history. And we just had the good fortune to really hit it off. And um, it was a lovely visit. And the partner, again, whose name I cannot remember, is hoping to come back to do a research sabbatical.
Mm,
So we'll see if that comes to fruition.
yeah.
Um, but you had talked about uh, working with me on just finding other kinds of stuff in the collection. And
Mhm.
to be honest, this has been a very unusual project in my world, in my field. It's very rare that you start a collecting initiative from nothing and you see it grow like this one has.
Mhm.
And I have had the incredible fortune to be here since the very beginning.
Yeah.
And so I have seen all of this stuff come in. I have engaged with literally all of the donors who have given us material. And so as a result, I have a really comprehensive understanding of what's in the and deep understanding of what's in the collection, which is very atypical because typically you take a job like this and you're walking into an existing collection that has its strengths in whatever areas,
Yeah.
and logistically there just never seems to be enough time in the day to engage at a intense level with just exposing yourself to everything that's in the collection. So, so it's been fruitful in that respect as well, for my capacity to be able to help researchers like yourself um, connect with what it is they're kind of looking for.
Yeah. Yeah.
It looks
Should
like
we open up to questions from,
yes, I think we should.
yeah, I would love if anybody else has questions for either of us, um, feel free to start writing those in the chat or in the Q&A. We would love to take them, either of us. Um, while people are maybe thinking about that, Stuart, I had a question for you. Um, I mean, just on a more practical level, what are some ways that people can do to get involved with GLAMA, or just to like become aware of it, or what are maybe some needs that GLAMA maybe has coming up that maybe a community could help with?
We we do all sorts of public programming, public facing programming like this, and um, some of the projects that we've got on the horizon include the installation of an historic marker that will commemorate Womantown, which
Yes.
was
Yeah.
which was an early 1990s initiative to create an intentional urban women's community in a neighborhood, in a specific neighborhood in Midtown Kansas City. And it was quite successful for about a little more than half a decade, and it was really innovative. And because they advertised globally, and they received inquiries from across the world about women who wanted to come and live in this neighborhood, and it revitalized the neighborhood. And so we felt it was important enough to take these steps um, to remember the work of these women. And so we are installing a marker and having a block party on Thursday, June 13th, um,
Mm,
in the afternoon. I think it's going to be a really fun event. The founders of Womantown are coming up from Georgia. We're hoping to have well, there'll be a number of current day Womantown residents um, at the event. We're hoping to get some politicians there. The mayor, I think, will probably show up, and it should be a very fun event. Um, but in terms of support for the archive, we're always welcome to talk with folks who might have material to donate. I frequently get asked, well, what do you want for the archive? And my response is, well, I don't know. What do you have? Because I never know what folks have saved, and it's always a surprise. So that is one direct way. And also, yes, 24. Last fall, we launched an initiative a funding initiative to raise money to support an endowed position, to create an endowed position that's dedicated to GLAMA. And we're still kind of in the early stages, but there will be most likely this year some more public facing marketing about that initiative. Our thinking being that if we have a position that is not, to be honest, not paid for with state money, that is paid for with private funding, then that provides some protection for the collection, no matter which way the political winds blow.
Yeah.
And I think it's a very astute approach, and I'm hoping we'll get the funds raised before before I retire in a few years.
Yeah.
So we'll see what happens.
We have a couple questions. We have some on our end. My queer archive class, is it continuing at KCAI? No, it has come with me. I will be offering it in at Skidmore in a kind of altered way, but in upstate New York. But I made that class specifically with the hopes that it would serve the queer students at the Kansas City Art Institute. And so I hope that somebody will create their own engagement with the archive and create their own kind of class that continues to serve queer students at the Art Institute. There's another question about the recent news from Georgia about severing ties with the ALA. Does that worry you, Stuart?
It's concerning, yes. What's concerning about it is just the overreach of folks in the political realm, and the impact that they have on folks just trying to do their jobs. I mean, you wouldn't expect politicians to demand that medical professionals disassociate themselves from the American Medical Association. Why is it okay then for them to expect that librarians have to sever their ties with their primary national professional organization as well? It's petty, and it's really kind of ludicrous. And again, it's just in some ways, it's just a way to for some politicians to garner some media attention in a very media saturated world. So the more
Yeah.
extreme they have to be more extreme in order to get the 15 seconds of attention that they're going to get in the variety of tools that people pay attention to. And what you don't see, and what never makes the news, is when those ties are reestablished, which they will be eventually.
Yeah.
That won't make headlines like the ties that were severed. So I think it will be, as Ruben has sort of indicated, it's a matter of patience and just waiting until things calm down, and then things will return back to normal.
Yeah. We have another question here. Do donors know that their gifts to the archive will be used for publicly visible projects? How do you work with these kinds of materials when donors are around to see what's happening with it?
Most
Might
of
be
the
one.
donors,
Yeah.
most of the donors understand that they are giving their materials to a research archive,
Mhm.
and that those materials are open to be used in a number of different ways. I try to bring that up in conversation when I'm working with the donor, but they understand it's going to a library, and it will be available to the public, and there are some there are some ethical considerations that we have to take into account with regard to these specific kinds of materials. For example, the photographs that we make publicly available through our digital library online, those photographs are of public spaces, because the rule of thumb is if you're in a public space, you have no expectation to a right of privacy. We have a number of images from private parties from the 1950s. Those we won't make available online because that's not a public event. And there may be people pictured in those images who weren't out, who may never have been out. And it's unethical to distribute those online without those individuals' permission. So there are some special considerations to take into account when we're dealing with materials in this particular collection. But by and large, the folks who give us the stuff recognize that they are giving it to the world, essentially.
Yeah, and I think to maybe answer the second half of that question, as an artist who is really like, I mean, in many ways, I'm appropriating what has being, has been posted, has been put and publicized, right? Um, and so that for me, that brings a real particular level of care. I always think I want to honor that story. I don't want to in any way like impose like a maybe an alternate kind of meaning. I'd rather find a way to kind of honor it overall. I see the exhibition with Phyllis's handwriting as a way to kind of honor it and not alter it in any way. To show her as this kind of like guiding beacon for us in the present moment. Um, the one of the pieces that I had that was part of the exhibition, one of the larger installations, um, which to kind of go back to this piece, which is called He Loved His Garden. This was kind of my way to also think about honoring Drew Schaefer, who in a tribute website to him, his former partner, who was with him when he eventually succumbed to complications from HIV/AIDS in the 80s. One of the last things that he kind of did in his life after he kind of slowed down was garden. And he was known to love his rose bushes. So I wanted to create this kind of burst of bright color that took up a large portion of this wall with these woodcut prints of roses as a way to honor um, Drew as well. Um, so that to me was like really important. And I just think that's a really kind of like true concern that we should always have, um, when we're dealing with objects that are in the public. So yeah, maybe we have time for like one more question. There are any others for the Q&A? Um, One question, will I come back to KC? Yes, always. I joked with a friend that it felt like I was coming back almost every month for a while I was preparing for the Nerman show. But I don't think I could stay away. There's so many good friends there. I love Kansas City. Thank you, Stuart, for being willing to be part of this conversation. And it's nice to reunite with you virtually. Um, yeah, I definitely miss Kansas City and everyone there. And if you haven't seen the exhibition yet, please see it. It would be really quite wonderful. And go visit Glamma if you're in Kansas City or visiting. Go to the UMKC Miller Nichols Library um, and go visit. Make an appointment to go visit. It's a really incredible collection. So thank you everyone for being here to listen to this. Thank you, Stuart, for
Thank you.
yeah. And thank you to the Nerman and Charlotte Street Foundation